The ancient pharaohs of Egypt claimed to be gods. This idea was incredibly powerful. It profoundly shaped how people viewed their rulers and their own place in the world. This was not merely an isolated belief in a distant land. It laid a foundational blueprint for leadership that would resonate through millennia. Many subsequent leaders, in various cultures and eras, aspired to a similar kind of unquestioned authority. They desired that people would obey them without hesitation, without challenge. This yearning for ultimate, divinely sanctioned power began long ago along the fertile banks of the Nile. It continues to manifest in different, sometimes subtle forms, even in our modern world. The pharaoh was far more than a simple king or a political leader. He was perceived as a living god, a divine being walking among mortals. He served as the crucial intermediary between the earthly world and the vast, mysterious divine realm. His word was not just law, it was sacred decree. His authority was considered absolute and divinely ordained. This belief system was the bedrock of Egyptian society, essential for maintaining social order. It successfully held the complex structure of Egyptian civilization together for thousands of years. People genuinely believed the pharaoh was responsible for maintaining cosmic balance, known as Ma'at. To disobey him was to invite chaos and disaster upon the entire land. This potent claim of divinity was an exceptionally clever and effective tool of governance. It served to justify the immense power concentrated in the pharaoh's hands. It rendered any challenge to his rule almost unthinkable, almost sacrilegious. Who, after all, would dare to question or raise a hand against a god? This concept established a powerful and enduring precedent for rulers who followed. Leaders in later empires and kingdoms across the globe also sought to bolster their positions by claiming divine backing or special favor from higher powers. Kings in medieval Europe, for instance, frequently spoke of the divine right of kings. Roman emperors were often deified, sometimes after their death and occasionally even while they were still alive. The idea that rulers are inherently special, chosen or guided by supernatural forces persisted with remarkable tenacity. Even in our contemporary, often secular times, distinct echoes of this ancient practice remain. Some modern leaders consciously or unconsciously cultivate an almost godlike image. They employ sophisticated propaganda techniques to present themselves as infallible, uniquely wise, or indispensable saviors. They demand, and often receive, complete and unquestioning loyalty from their followers. While few modern leaders would explicitly declare themselves to be gods in the literal sense, the underlying desire for unquestionable authority and unwavering obedience is still palpably present in many political arenas. The way societies often grant extraordinary power to certain individuals frequently has deep, unacknowledged roots in these ancient claims of divine status. Understanding this long historical trajectory helps us to see current power dynamics with greater clarity. It reveals a persistent pattern in how human power is constructed, legitimized, and maintained over vast stretches of time. The pharaohs of Egypt did not simply wake up one day and find themselves regarded as gods. Their divine status was not an accident of fate. It was, in fact, the result of a meticulously planned and continuously reinforced project of image-making and state-sponsored propaganda. The priestly class played an absolutely critical role in this ongoing effort. Priests conducted elaborate daily rituals. They recited sacred texts and told compelling stories that consistently reinforced and amplified the pharaoh's divine nature and his unique connection to the pantheon of gods. Grand temples were constructed throughout the land, ostensibly to honor the gods, but the pharaoh was always a central figure in these sacred spaces, often depicted as equal to the deities. Art and inscriptions on temple walls and public monuments constantly showed the pharaoh in the company of gods, receiving their blessings or acting with their authority. This relentless messaging profoundly shaped public perception and belief. Statues of the pharaohs were frequently colossal in scale, designed to dwarf the observer. They typically depicted the rulers as eternally strong, perfectly serene, and timeless beings, far removed from ordinary human frailty. These were not merely artistic expressions, they were powerful political statements, instruments of statecraft. They aimed to project the pharaoh as a figure larger than life itself. Their purpose was to inspire overwhelming awe, profound respect, and unquestioning obedience among the populace. Consider the Great Sphinx of Giza, or the towering statues of Ramses II at Abu Simbel. Such monumental images were strategically placed and widely visible. They served as constant, imposing reminders to the people of the pharaoh's immense power and his intimate, inseparable connection to the divine order. This sophisticated visual culture was absolutely key to maintaining control over Egypt for centuries. Royal names and elaborate titles also played a significant part in bolstering the pharaoh's divine image. Pharaohs typically possessed multiple names, each carefully chosen to highlight a different facet of their power, their divine connections, or their role as rulers. Titles such as Son of Ra directly and unequivocally linked the pharaoh to Ra, the paramount sun god, one of the most powerful and revered deities in the Egyptian pantheon. These sacred names and titles were not confined to obscure documents. They were prominently used in all official inscriptions, decrees, and public pronouncements. They were recited repeatedly during important state ceremonies and religious festivals. This constant, pervasive repetition helped to solidify the idea in the collective consciousness that the pharaoh was indeed chosen by the gods, or perhaps was a manifestation of a god himself on earth. This ancient Egyptian practice of carefully crafting and managing a divine or semi-divine image for the ruler set a lasting precedent. Leaders throughout subsequent human history have adopted and adapted similar methods to consolidate their power and enhance their authority. They too have used potent symbols, elaborate ceremonies, and compelling foundational stories. They have commissioned grand monuments to themselves and carefully controlled how they are depicted in official art and, in more recent times, in the media. Think of the Roman emperors, with their cults and deifications. Think of the absolute monarchs of Europe with their ornate courts and claims of God-given sovereignty. Even today, political leaders across the globe invest heavily in managing their public image. They strive to appear strong, wise, decisive, and indispensable to their nations. The specific tools and technologies have certainly changed, but the fundamental goal of image craft often remains strikingly similar to that of the ancient god-kings of Egypt, The pyramids of Egypt are arguably the most instantly recognizable symbols of that ancient civilization. They tower over the desert landscape, enduring testaments to a bygone era. They are primarily known as giant, elaborate tombs constructed for the pharaohs, designed to protect their bodies and facilitate their journey into the afterlife. But these structures are far more than just sepulchres. They are profound monuments to the pharaoh's earthly power and his supreme authority. They vividly demonstrate his capacity to command and mobilize vast resources across the entire kingdom. This mobilization included not just materials like stone and timber, but also human labor on an almost unimaginable scale. Constructing these massive edifices required incredible logistical organization, sophisticated engineering skills, and crucially the sustained, arduous toil of tens of thousands of people over many decades. For a very long time, the popular imagination, fueled by Hollywood epics, held that enslaved people built the pyramids under brutal conditions. However, modern archaeological research and analysis of historical records suggest a more nuanced picture. It is now understood that some of the workforce consisted of skilled artisans, engineers, and craftsmen. These individuals were respected for their expertise, lived in organized communities near the construction sites, and received adequate rations of food and drink. Nevertheless, a substantial portion of the labor force was likely composed of conscripted peasants. These ordinary Egyptians were compelled to work on these colossal state projects for a certain period each year, particularly during the Nile's inundation when agricultural work was impossible. This was effectively a form of taxation paid through labor. Their lives were undoubtedly hard, the work dangerous and conditions often grueling. Accidents were likely frequent and many undoubtedly suffered, fell ill, or died for the pharaoh's eternal glory. These grand, imposing structures were ultimately built to serve the pharaoh's ego and his profound desire for immortality. They were designed to ensure his successful passage into the afterlife and to perpetuate his name and legacy for eternity. Simultaneously, they broadcast a clear and intimidating message to the living population of Egypt and to neighboring lands. The pyramids unequivocally demonstrated the pharaoh's immense control over the land, its resources, and, most importantly, its people. The sheer overwhelming size of the pyramid served as a constant visible reminder of the ruler's might. It silently proclaimed, "The pharaoh is all-powerful. He can command the movement of mountains of stone. He can direct armies of workers to achieve seemingly impossible feats. His will is absolute and unchallengeable." This overt display of power was instrumental in maintaining his rule and the stability of the Egyptian state. The human suffering intrinsically involved in these monumental projects was immense, though often unrecorded in official inscriptions. Imagine the relentless desert heat, the back-breaking labor of quarrying, hauling, and precisely placing unimaginably heavy stone blocks. The long hours of toil day after day, year after year. These workers, many of them anonymous, constructed some of the most magnificent and enduring structures in human history. Yet their individual lives, their personal sacrifices, and their suffering were often overlooked or considered insignificant in the grand, state-sponsored narrative that focused solely on the pharaoh's power and eternal glory. This disturbing pattern of utilizing mass human effort, often involving coercion and hardship for monumental, ego-driven projects, is sadly not unique to ancient Egypt. It stands as a recurring, somber theme throughout the long and complex tapestry of human history. Great and celebrated achievements have often come at a staggering and frequently unacknowledged human cost. In our current era, we continue to witness the undertaking of massive construction projects all around the globe. We build colossal dams that reshape river systems, skyscrapers that pierce the clouds, and sprawling sports stadiums for international events. These modern marvels often serve as potent symbols of national pride, technological prowess, or corporate dominance. They invariably require enormous investments of capital, advanced engineering, and vast amounts of human labor. Much like the pyramids of old, they are frequently intended to impress, to awe, and to make a statement about human capability. They demonstrate what societies can achieve through sophisticated technology, complex organization, and concentrated effort. But amidst the admiration for these feats, we must also pause and critically ask, who are the primary beneficiaries of these ambitious projects, and equally importantly, who ultimately pays the price, often hidden from view. Sometimes contemporary mega-projects also involve labor practices that raise serious ethical questions. Workers in certain parts of the world, particularly in developing nations or within marginalized communities, continue to face dangerously unsafe conditions on construction sites. They may toil for excessively long hours, receive wages that are barely enough for subsistence, and have little to no legal protection or recourse. Consider, for example, the construction of some stadiums for global sporting events or the conditions in factories that produce cheap consumer goods for the global market. The true human cost associated with these enterprises can be effectively concealed behind gleaming modern facades and positive public relations campaigns. The intense pressure to complete these projects quickly and as cheaply as possible can unfortunately lead to the exploitation and endangerment of the workforce. This reality is perhaps not so fundamentally different from the systems of forced or conscripted labor that characterized ancient times. The ego and ambition of leaders also continue to play a significant role in the initiation and execution of modern megaprojects. Political leaders often desire to leave behind a tangible legacy to be remembered for grand, visible achievements that bear their name or mark their tenure in office. Corporations too seek to display their wealth, their influence, and their dominance in the marketplace through impressive headquarters or flagship projects. This pursuit of monumental display can sometimes lead to the prioritization of projects that are not always economically sound, socially necessary, or environmentally sustainable. The powerful desire for a monumental statement can overshadow more practical considerations and the genuine needs of the population. The pharaohs desired pyramids to secure their passage to the afterlife and solidify their divine status. Modern leaders might desire a new international airport, a high-speed rail line, or a giant bridge as symbols of progress and to enhance their political legacy. Centralized power structures are often essential to push through these colossal megaprojects. Decisions are typically made by governments or the boards of large corporations. These entities control the necessary financial resources, the legal frameworks, and often the narrative surrounding the project. They possess the means to overcome opposition, whether from local communities, environmental groups, or dissenting voices. In some instances, local communities are forcibly displaced to make way for new developments. Valid environmental concerns might be downplayed, ignored, or overridden in the name of progress or national interest. The prevailing narrative presented to the public is usually that these projects are for the greater good of society. However, it is always crucial to look closely and critically at such claims. Who precisely defines this greater good? And are the proclaimed benefits and opportunities distributed fairly among all segments of society, or do they disproportionately favor a select few? The parallels to the ancient pharaohs and their pyramid-building enterprises are sometimes uncomfortably clear and warrant careful consideration. Section 5. Controlling the story, ancient scribes and modern media. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt possessed a keen understanding of the profound power inherent in stories and narratives. They knew, perhaps intuitively, that controlling the dominant narrative was an essential key to effectively controlling the population and maintaining their authority. Consequently, they employed a dedicated class of literate scribes whose primary function was to meticulously record the pharaoh's achievements, decrees, and a version of history favorable to the ruling power. These official records were not always, or even often, objective, unbiased accounts of events as they truly happened. They were frequently carefully crafted pieces of propaganda designed to portray the pharaoh in the most positive light possible, as a great and invincible warrior, a supremely wise and just ruler, a beloved favorite of the gods. Any failures, defeats, or shortcomings were rarely mentioned. If they were too significant to ignore completely, they were skillfully spun into tales of resilience, divine tests, or even disguised victories. This practice resulted in the creation of a carefully curated and highly selective official history. Inscriptions carved onto the massive stone walls of temples and on public monuments served to disseminate these official stories to a wider audience. Intricate hieroglyphs and vivid reliefs depicted the pharaoh in heroic poses, single-handedly smiting Egypt's enemies. They showed him making generous offerings to the gods, thereby ensuring their favor and the prosperity of the land. It is true that only a small, educated elite possessed the ability to read the complex hieroglyphic script. However, the images themselves, the scenes of power, order, and divine sanction, conveyed powerful and unambiguous messages to everyone, literate or not. These carefully constructed stories were further reinforced through public festivals, religious ceremonies, and oral traditions. This constant multi-layered reinforcement of the pharaoh's greatness and legitimacy played a crucial role in maintaining social cohesion and ensuring that people believed in the existing system and their place within it. Modern systems of power, whether governmental or corporate, also rely extensively on the strategic control of narratives. Governments across the world maintain press secretaries, communications departments, and sometimes entire ministries devoted to shaping public perception and managing the flow of information. Corporations invest heavily in public relations teams, marketing departments, and branding strategies. All these entities work diligently to craft and promote narratives that serve their interests. The media, in its various forms, plays an enormous and often decisive role in this process. News outlets, social media platforms, film, television, and other forms of entertainment can all be utilized, consciously or unconsciously, to spread certain narratives and suppress others. They have the power to highlight perceived successes and downplay or ignore failures. They can contribute to the creation of heroes and villains in the public mind. Just as it was in ancient Egypt, access to information and the means of its dissemination are crucial elements of power in the modern world. Those who control the key channels of information can significantly influence what people think, what they discuss, and what they believe to be true. They can effectively shape public debates, frame issues in particular ways, and limit the visibility of dissenting opinions or alternative perspectives. Today, we are confronted not with a scarcity of information, but with a veritable flood of it from countless sources. This deluge can make it incredibly difficult to discern what is accurate and what is misleading. The phenomena of fake news, targeted disinformation campaigns, and strategically deployed propaganda are common features of our contemporary information landscape. Powerful individuals, organizations, and states increasingly use these sophisticated tools to maintain their influence and achieve their objectives. Understanding how narratives are constructed, disseminated and controlled is therefore more important now than ever before. It is a vital skill for navigating our complex world and for seeing beyond the often carefully polished official story. Section 6 to the Grand Deception: Truth, Buried Under Stone and Spin. The magnificent monumental structures of ancient Egypt, epitomized by the pyramids, were in many ways built upon a grand deception. They projected an enduring image of eternal, divinely sanctioned power and unwavering cosmic order. However, beneath this impressive and carefully maintained facade lay a far more complex and often troubling reality. The pharaoh, despite the official portrayal, was not truly a god incarnate. He was a human being, subject to the same flaws, fears, vulnerabilities, and biological limitations as any other mortal. The perfect cosmic balance, or ma'at, that he supposedly maintained through his divine connection was, in reality, frequently disrupted by natural disasters like famine or drought, by outbreaks of disease, or by periods of intense political instability and internal conflict. The pyramids themselves, while symbols of eternal life in one sense, were also fundamentally tombs, stark reminders of mortality, monuments to death, not just to an unending divine existence. The official narrative, so carefully inscribed on stone and papyrus, deliberately hid many uncomfortable and inconvenient truths from public view. It systematically concealed the immense human cost involved in the construction of the great monuments, the sweat, the injuries, the shortened lives of countless laborers. It glossed over the often vicious internal power struggles that took place within the ruling elite, the court intrigues, and the regional rivalries. It largely ignored the routine exploitation of ordinary people, the peasants and workers whose surplus production and labor fueled the entire system. The primary focus of all official communication was invariably on the glory of the pharaoh, the strength of the state, and the favor of the gods. Individual suffering, personal aspirations, or dissenting voices were deemed irrelevant to this overarching grand story. This practice of obscuring inconvenient truths behind impressive displays of power and piety is not unique to ancient Egypt. It is, unfortunately, a common and recurring tactic employed by power structures throughout history. Contemporary corporations and governments also frequently engage in practices that bear a striking resemblance to these ancient deceptions. Corporations might meticulously cultivate an image of environmental stewardship and social responsibility through slick advertising and philanthropic initiatives. Yet behind this green or caring facade, they might be engaging in activities that cause significant environmental damage, or they might rely on exploitative labor practices in their supply chains. Governments might eloquently speak of freedom, democracy, and human rights on the international stage, yet simultaneously they might be conducting mass surveillance on their own citizens, suppressing political dissent, or supporting undemocratic regimes abroad. Grand public pronouncements, impressive new buildings, and ambitious national projects can serve to distract public attention from underlying systemic problems or controversial policies. The monumental lies of today are often far more sophisticated and subtle than those of the past. They are disseminated through complex, multi-layered media channels and employ advanced psychological techniques. The unvarnished truth often gets buried deep beneath accumulated layers of sophisticated public relations, carefully managed spin, and outright disinformation. Whistleblowers who attempt to expose these hidden truths or unethical practices are frequently marginalized, discredited, or punished. Independent journalists and media organizations that investigate too deeply or too critically can face immense pressure, legal challenges, or economic boycotts. It requires considerable effort, critical thinking skills, and a healthy dose of skepticism to dig beneath the polished surface of official narratives. We need to constantly question the stories we are told by those in power. We need to actively look for the hidden realities, the silenced voices, and the suppressed data. Just as archaeologists painstakingly uncover the material truth about ancient Egyptian society by excavating beneath the sands, we too need to engage in a kind of intellectual archaeology to uncover the often obscured truths about our own times. Section 7. The Control Template: From Ancient Priests to Modern CEOs. The fundamental template of control, so effectively established and refined by the pharaohs and their priestly allies in ancient Egypt, has proven to be remarkably durable and adaptable. It has been adopted, modified, and reused by rulers and power structures throughout the vast expanse of human history across diverse cultures and continents. The core elements of this template often remain strikingly consistent despite superficial changes in context or ideology. First and crucially, those in power claim a higher form of legitimacy for their rule. This legitimacy might be derived from divine right, as with the Pharaohs, from a supposed historical destiny, as with some nationalist movements, from claims of ideological superiority, as with totalitarian regimes, or even from assertions of superior knowledge, expertise, or efficiency, as sometimes seen in technocratic or corporate environments. Second, they work to centralize power, concentrating decision-making authority and control over resources into the hands of a select few. Third, they use this concentrated power to extract resources, financial, natural, and human, including the mobilization of labor, often for projects that enhance their prestige or solidify their control. Roman emperors, who ruled over a vast and diverse empire, clearly followed this ancient template. Many emperors were deified either during their lifetime or posthumously, creating a cult of personality and divine sanction around their rule. They commissioned and oversaw the construction of massive public works, monuments, roads, and aqueducts, utilizing the immense wealth and manpower of the empire. They controlled vast territories through a highly centralized bureaucracy, a formidable professional army, and a sophisticated legal system. Similarly, medieval popes and kings in Europe also employed this well-tested model. The Church claimed ultimate spiritual authority, derived directly from God, and wielded considerable temporal power. Monarchs ruled by the doctrine of divine right, asserting that their authority was God-given and therefore unchallengeable by mortals. They commanded armies, levied taxes, and built magnificent cathedrals and imposing castles, which served as potent symbols of their power and piety. The age of empires, particularly from the 16th to the 20th centuries, saw European colonial powers implement similar tactics on a global scale. They justified their often brutal colonial rule with claims of cultural, racial, or religious superiority over the colonized peoples. They systematically exploited the natural resources and human labor of their vast colonial territories. They constructed infrastructure, railways, ports, administrative buildings that primarily served the economic and strategic interests of the imperial mother country, rather than the needs of the local populations. Even after the formal decline of monarchies and colonial empires in the 20th century, new forms of centralized power quickly emerged. Totalitarian regimes, both fascist and communist, took narrative control and state propaganda to unprecedented extremes. They demanded absolute, unquestioning loyalty from their citizens and ruthlessly suppressed any form of dissent. Today, this ancient template of control can still be discerned in the operations of some very large multinational corporations, and even in certain aspects of modern democratic states. Chief executive officers, CEOs of global corporations, can wield immense economic and political power, sometimes rivaling that of national governments. They control vast financial resources, direct the labor of hundreds of thousands of employees worldwide, and their decisions can profoundly affect millions of lives and entire economies. These corporations meticulously craft their public image through sophisticated branding, marketing, and public relations campaigns. The persistent desire to control the narrative, to centralize decision-making power, and to direct resources towards specific, often profit-driven or growth-oriented goals remains a powerful and influential force in our contemporary world. This ancient template, first forged in the Nile Valley, continues to shape our societies, our economies, and our individual lives in ways we may not always fully recognize. Section 8. Earth scars, spirits strain, the price of unchecked power. This long and often brutal history of centralized power, coupled with ego-driven monumental projects, has left deep and lasting scars upon the face of the earth. The Pharaohs' massive building programs, for example, required the quarrying of enormous quantities of stone from hillsides and deserts. They consumed vast amounts of timber for scaffolding, tools, and fuel, contributing to deforestation in the Nile Valley and surrounding regions. As human civilizations grew in scale and complexity, and as more societies adopted variations of this resource-intensive model of development, the overall scale of environmental impact increased exponentially. Forests were cleared for agriculture and construction. Mountains were mined for metals and minerals. Rivers were dammed, diverted and polluted. The relentless pursuit of grand monuments, imperial expansion, and later industrial growth very often came at a direct and severe expense to the health and integrity of the natural world. In modern times, this environmental impact has escalated to a truly critical and potentially irreversible level. The Industrial Revolution and the subsequent waves of technological development were largely driven by nations and corporations seeking economic growth, global dominance, and increased material wealth. This process has led to widespread pollution of our air, water, and soil. We now face existential global challenges, such as human-induced climate change, rapid deforestation on multiple continents, alarming rates of biodiversity loss, and mass extinction of species. These profound environmental problems are intrinsically linked to a dominant global system that consistently prioritizes short-term economic gains, continuous material growth, and the pursuit of monumental technological or corporate achievements over long-term ecological sustainability and planetary health. The deep-seated desire for control over nature, much like the Pharaohs' desire for absolute control over their human and material domain, has had far-reaching and often devastating unforeseen consequences. Our planet is clearly showing the severe strain of these accumulated pressures. Beyond the tangible physical damage inflicted upon the Earth, this pervasive system of centralized control and hierarchical power has also taken a significant toll on the human spirit. When power is heavily concentrated in the hands of a few, and when ordinary people are treated primarily as resources to be managed or cogs in a vast machine, their individual spirit, creativity, and sense of agency can be systematically crushed or diminished. The constant societal focus on external achievements, on the accumulation of material wealth, and on grand, superficial displays of power or success can lead to a profound sense of inner emptiness and alienation. Ancient Egyptians, for instance, possessed a rich and complex spiritual life, evident in their mythology and religious practices. However, the state religion often served, at least in part, to reinforce the pharaoh's supreme power and the existing social order. Genuine, independent spiritual seeking and critical inquiry can become very difficult when conformity is demanded and critical thought is actively discouraged or suppressed. This pervasive emphasis on hierarchy, obedience, and conformity can effectively stifle human creativity, innovation, and the free expression of individual perspectives. It can lead to a widespread sense of powerlessness and apathy among ordinary people who may feel that their voices do not matter and that they have no real influence over the forces shaping their lives. When narratives are tightly controlled by those in power, it becomes increasingly difficult for people to connect with deeper, more authentic truths, or to envision and pursue alternative ways of living and organizing society. The relentless, culturally ingrained pursuit of more power, more wealth, more possessions, more monumental projects often distracts individuals and societies from cultivating spiritual well-being, fostering genuine human connection, and nurturing a respectful relationship with each other and with the natural world. Our collective human spirit inevitably suffers when unchecked human ego and the drive for absolute control go unchallenged for extended periods. Section 9. Seeing the Strings, Awareness as the Path to Freedom. We have journeyed through history and observed how the enduring legacy of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs continues to echo down through the centuries. Their sophisticated methods of claiming divine or unquestionable authority, their use of mass, often forced labor for monumental constructions, their strategic control of narratives, and their practice of building monumental lies to mask uncomfortable truths have been repeatedly adopted and adapted by subsequent power structures. These persistent patterns of power, ego, and control have undeniably shaped the course of human civilizations. They have certainly led to some incredible artistic, architectural, and technological achievements. However, they have also been responsible for immense human suffering, systematic exploitation, and significant, often irreversible environmental damage. Recognizing these deeply ingrained historical patterns is the absolutely essential first step towards imagining and creating meaningful change. For many thousands of years, the vast majority of people living within these hierarchical systems largely accepted their prescribed roles and the status quo. They genuinely believed in the divine right of kings, emperors, or other rulers. They accepted their designated place within the rigid social hierarchy, often with little question. They generally did not, or could not, critically challenge the official stories and narratives handed down to them by those in authority, but human understanding is not static, it evolves over time. The rise of scientific inquiry, the gradual spread of literacy and education to wider segments of the population, and the development of new communication technologies, from the printing press to the internet, have provided humanity with more powerful tools for critical analysis and information sharing. We can now analyze power structures and their mechanisms with greater sophistication and insight. We have access to a far greater diversity of information and perspectives than ever before in human history. Awareness is an incredibly potent tool for individual and collective empowerment. When we develop a clear understanding of how power actually operates, how it is acquired, maintained, and wielded, we become significantly less susceptible to manipulation and control. When we learn to see the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, strings of narrative control that shape our perceptions of the world, we can begin to think more independently and critically for ourselves. When we truly recognize and acknowledge the profound human and environmental costs associated with unchecked ego and the relentless pursuit of dominance, we are better positioned to demand transparency, accountability, and systemic change from our leaders and institutions. This awareness is not merely an intellectual exercise, it is also about cultivating empathy, fostering a deeper sense of shared humanity, and understanding our profound interconnectedness with each other and with the earth that sustains us all. The ancient template of power and control, first perfected by the Pharaohs, is indeed very old and deeply entrenched, but it is not immutable or unbreakable. By consciously recognizing its historical roots and, more importantly, its various manifestations in our contemporary world, we empower ourselves to challenge its continued dominance. We can collectively choose to build societies that are based on fundamentally different principles. Principles such as genuine cooperation rather than coercive competition, long-term ecological sustainability rather than short-term profit, and the authentic well-being and flourishing of all people, not just a privileged few. The Pharaohs constructed their legacy with massive pyramids of stone, symbols of their power over others. Perhaps the great challenge of our time is to construct a different kind of future. A future based on shared understanding, conscious ethical choices, and a commitment to justice and planetary health. The path towards a better, more equitable and sustainable world begins with the courageous act of opening our eyes. It begins, quite simply, with awareness.